Yeah, we'll run some experiments, but not right now. I've got a bracket that I'm hoping to get. All right, so gone through the Exodus, the conquest. We're going to go through the Judges tonight. And then next week we'll actually shift into the transition into the United Monarchy period. I think everybody's got their handouts out. We need the map of the tribal allotments, the Judges timeline, and the map of the Middle East. All right, so the book of Judges covers the era of the Judges. Did anybody get a chance to read the entirety of the book? You read it 1 through 22. Micaiah, you also did. You did too? So did you notice there's some oddball stories at the end?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's not about any judges. Like, no names attached to that. So the book of Judges has 2 chapters that introduce the book. And then it's got the standard timeline of all the judges, going from Othniel to Ehud and through Deborah and all the way down to Samson. And then after Samson, there are 2 appendixes to the book of Judges. 2 stories that just get tacked on. And they're actually very much out of chronological sequence because those 2 stories happened before almost everything else that happened in the book of Judges.
Really?
Wait,
Yes.
I did not know that.
I know. I'm going to show that to you here shortly. And then also in the period of the Judges and also at the beginning of the period of the Judges is the book of Ruth. So Ruth is like another story tacked on, but that happens to actually be at the beginning of the era. The end of the era actually is covered in 1 Samuel. That was not part of the readings, but when Samuel comes onto the scene, Eli is the judge of Israel. He's the high priest, and he is the last full judge. Samuel's a transitional character, and we'll talk more about him next week. Now, the period of the Judges has like a whole host of chronological challenges for the historian, which are summarized on this handout here.
Dad, am I supposed to have this one instead of
No,
this one?
Yeah, that one would be, yep.
Okay.
Either probably, but the other one would be more handy. So in 1 Kings chapter 6, this is when Solomon starts building the temple, and we mentioned this verse when we were talking about the chronology and how we can date the creation. So one of those key verses is where it says in 1 Kings 6:1, in the 480th year after the people of Israel came out of the land of Egypt, the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, which is the 2nd month, he began to build the house of the Lord. And so this ends up being one of the huge connection points in the chronology that allows us to jump over the entire period of the Judges from the building of the temple all the way back to the beginning of the Exodus. So on the handout that I just handed out, you'll see at the very bottom, the temple construction begins in 1012 BC, and we have that dated with great a level of confidence. And since it was in the 4th year of Solomon's reign, that means Solomon's reign began at 1015 BC. But if you jump back that 479-year period to the Exodus from Egypt is 1491. Yep. So that gives us a certain period of time in between that all the events that happen in between have to happen in. So if you remember, the 40th year of the Exodus is when they're on the far side of the Jordan and they conquer an area of Amorites. One area was controlled by Sihon, the king of Heshbon, and the other one was the territory of Og, king of Bashan. Does this ring in any bells? It's quite a few weeks ago. So Og and Sihon both fall. A couple of tribes decided, hey, we like this land, we want to settle here instead of going across. And so then in the conquest, those 2.5 tribes just sent soldiers over for the fighting, and then they went back across the Jordan to settle there. Those would be Manasseh, Reuben, and Gad, which is on the map there. So that is the only event that is referenced in the book of Judges that you can connect anything in the time frame of the Judges to. And this happens in a speech that Jephthah gives just before starting war. This is found in Judges chapter 11, verse 21. It says, "The Lord, the God of Israel, gave Sihon and all his people into the hand of Israel, and they defeated them. So Israel took possession of all the land of the Amorites who inhabited that country." And you skip a few verses forward, and it says, "While Israel lived in Heshbon and its villages, and in Aroer and its villages, and in all the cities that are on the banks of the Arnon, 300 years, why did you not deliver them within that time frame?" So we know that Jephthah's battle against the Ammonites took place 300 years after the 40th year of the Exodus. And that's the only piece of the Judges that we can connect. Now, everybody noticed while reading through there that you've got oppression, it lasts a certain number of years, and then they have rest from war for like 40 or 80 or however many years, right?
Until they disobey.
Until they disobey again, and then there's oppression again.
Right, and then there's another hero to come.
Another hero comes. So, between the end of the War of the Conquest and when Jephthah defeats the Ammonites, there's a 293-year gap of time. And if you add up all of those oppressions and rests from war and various different people judging, you end up with 319 years.
That's
Go figure. Any thoughts?
overlapping.
So some of this might overlap. So years may not be
Well, like,
sequential.
well, so like the Philistines are on one side of Israel, and I think the like Ammonites and Moabites are on the other side.
Yep.
So it could be like the Moabites are oppressing Israel, but at the same time the Philistines are, or the Ammonites are, or like they're being oppressed from different people groups at the same time, and so different judges emerge from different sides of it to, like essentially keep that side unoppressed. Or
Potentially. That's been theorized.
Could they have been going off of a lunar calendar?
That wouldn't shrink the time length down that badly. Like on the first side of this, you have a 26-year discrepancy. That's within spitting distance, and so that's not too far off. But after that battle, there's a 97-year gap to when David's reign begins, and you have 191 years worth of sequence in theory, although I'll explain how that one's more likely to have strong overlap. So this is a challenge. No chronologist has ever figured out how to reconcile this. The reason is that we don't have any way of verifying exactly how this all fits together yet. Right. Now this contrasts with the era of the kings, which we'll get to later, where we have it ironed out to the year, solid chronology. There are people that have tried to reconcile the Israelite kings' chronology to the Assyrians or the Egyptians, and then you get into trouble and you mess things up because you can't synchronize those well. But inside the scriptures, very easy to synchronize. So on the front half of this, before Jephthah defeats the Ammonites, the likely places of overlap are going to be with Tola and Jer. Those two judgeships could easily end up overlapping with some of Gideon's 40 years and some of the oppression by the Philistines and the Ammonites. And it doesn't even require their full 45 years. Now, if you read this text of the Judges straightforward, you wouldn't gather that impression, but it's not outside the realm of possibility. I have a spelling mistake in there. They were oppressed by Midian, not Midan. Medan, yes. So in the second gap there, after Jephthah, this one is a lot easier to see the overlap, because one of the difficulties with the book of Judges and the book of 1 Samuel is they don't mesh together well at all. And if you'll notice there, we have oppressed by the Philistines for 40 years, and then Samson judges for 20 years. Eli judges, but Eli's not mentioned in the book of Judges, and he's judging for 40 years, but his 40 years is under Philistine oppression. And so his 40 years of judging could very easily be the same 40 years of oppression by the Philistines. And another point of overlap is if you read through the story of Samson, it doesn't say that he actually delivered the Israelites from the Philistines, nor does it indicate that his 20 years of judgeship came after the 40 years of oppression. So
We could have been judging
while that 40 years of oppression was going on. This is not until days of Samuel that Israel is actually set free from the bondage of the Philistines. So that allows for an awful lot of years to get smushed together quite handily, and that makes that much easier. But nobody can iron out the details because there's a few wrinkles with the reign of Saul. Nothing in the Old Testament says how long Saul reigned. The one verse in 1 Samuel that references is corrupted, is missing words that are the numbers that we would need to know for that reign, and we'll illustrate that in a week. I was talking. No, not tonight, because it's next week. So I'll illustrate that with a different ESV Bible next week.
Your dreaming of finding when you were a little kid wanting to be a.
No, I wanted to find something else. Yes, but anyhow, so in the New Testament, I think Paul makes a reference to Saul having reigned 40 years. But there's nothing in the Old Testament that says he reigned 40 years. And most of the manuscripts don't have him reigning 40 years. So we don't actually know how long he reigned. So that one's another fuzzy point. But we do know when Solomon began building the temple and how long that was after the Exodus. It's just how everything fits in between. That's challenging. That's a mess. The only thing I want to point out for sure is the timeline on the 11 by 17, I'm positive is inaccurate and incorrect. Because if you see when Jephthah delivers them from the Ammonites, I believe is in 1188, not 1152. Is that what that little number is in there?
I have yet to find it. It's 1188.
1188, right.
Where did it say that? Oh.
Yep.
Yes.
So the main part of that timeline, where you go from light to black and light to black, the black sectors are all the oppressions and the light sectors are all the years resting from war. That was the way James Ussher put it together, and so I illustrated his chronology. I'm confident it's not correct because of that 300-year reference that doesn't line up well then. But that is just points out the magnitude of the challenge. Nobody has figured out how to do it yet. The overlap of some of the minor judges shows one of the ways that might fit together. But moving on from the chronology issues.
Oh my gosh, that's when Troy was destroyed by the Greeks?
Yeah, Troy was destroyed by the Greeks back in this neighborhood.
Oh my gosh.
Oh.
So there's lots of land left to be conquered. The Israelites came in, they conquered vast sections of it, but they skipped very large sections of it. Pieces of Judah, Benjamin, Manasseh, Ephraim, Zebulun, Asher, Naphtali, and Dan were all left somewhat unoccupied by the Israelites. And if you read in Judges chapter 2, you see there's a pattern that the whole book takes up. And actually, as a pastor, you learn that you never preach through the book of Judges because it's the same sermon over and over and over again. Because the Israelites forsake God, God hands them over to foreigners, Israel repents and turns back to God, so God sends them a judge to deliver them, and then the land has rest from war, ideally.
And then the whole thing happens all over again.
Yes. But a generation or two has gone by. And so as we read it, we're like, how in the world do they have this hard time learning this lesson? But every generation has to learn that lesson for themselves if they didn't remember and inherit it from their grandparents.
But it reads out like it's quick. And I know, you know what I mean? Am I anywhere close on the mark that they didn't just, in a 24-hour period, fall into Baal worship, did they?
No. It took a while.
Hi.
Hey, Amelia.
Oh my god.
Alright, that's fine. But you came with a special delivery.
That was nice.
Do you want me to get another table?
You need to.
See ya.
Thanks, Amelia. Alright, so flipping back to your slides, if you've got those handy. Minor judges and major judges. The major judges hold kind of the timeline together. The only difference between a major judge and a minor judge is the major judges have an awful lot more story connected to their name, and the minor judges just kind of exist for a little while, have an honorable mention, but it moves on from them quite quickly.
They got movie credits, but that's about it.
Yet that's about it. So the first judge is Othniel, and this is shortly after the conquest, because Othniel is mentioned as a part of the conquest.
Wait, he is?
Yes.
I remember
What is
this.
he mentioned for?
Caleb says, who's gonna fight and take this, and Othniel says, I'll do it, and because he wants Caleb's daughter in marriage.
Yeah.
So he married his cousin.
It was, yeah.
Wait,
So
is he-
Othniel was the son of Kenaz, who was the younger brother of Caleb.
Mhm.
And Caleb had a daughter named Aska.
Mhm.
So Othniel's name is significant. His name means the Lion of God. And an interesting trajectory that you see through the book of the Judges is you start off with the judge is the Lion of God, and he's the one who delivers Israel. And he's nephew and son-in-law of Caleb, so he's connected to that awesome, amazing generation. And Caleb's generation is the one who largely rebelled against God, and they all died in the wilderness. But Caleb was one of the two, Caleb and Joshua, who did not die from that generation and entered the land. And so he's kind of like, what would you call it?
He's a legend.
He's a legend, yes, in his own right. And Othniel's related to him, connected to him, and his name means the Lion of God.
It sounds similar to Ariel, which means almost the same thing.
Yes, Ariel and Othniel. There's just a little difference in the word used to reference the lion. Aram Naharaim is who is oppressing Israel at this time. Does anybody know where that is?
Did we read it?
Nope. You got to discern it from a map.
Oh,
Aram Naharaim.
I see Aram on the big map,
I wanna-
Wait, what?
just south of Tubal
Yep.
and west of Ashur,
Yes.
kind of on the Euphrates.
Yep. So this would be the land of Paddan Aram.
Mhm.
Naharaim is Hebrew for two rivers. So this is Aram of the two rivers. What two rivers would that be referencing?
Euphrates and Tigris.
Right.
Mhm.
So this is actually a great power empire here that has oppressed Israel for a brief period. You got the Arameans projecting power far down into the land of Canaan from their homeland.
It's like the Russians invading Ukraine.
No, it's like the Russians invading Iran. They had to go through a lot of countries to get there. Yeah. So this is a big country, and Othniel delivers Israel from them. And then we don't hear about the Arameans again for a really long time. Land gets rest from war for 40 years, and then the Israelites get subjugated to Eglon, the king of Moab. Let's find Moab on your Israelite map. Where is Moab?
It's like just to the southeast almost of them. Right?
Yep, southeast of Judah, far side of the Dead Sea, south of Reuben. So this is just a local power. Their neighbor subjugates them,
So it's like
18 years. It's probably a tributary relationship where the Israelites have to send them tribute.
Mhm.
So God sends Ehud. Now Ehud is not the Lion of God that Othniel was. He's a notch down. He's a left-handed Benjamite.
Yes.
That's great.
I love this story.
Yes, so remember Benjamin is the son of my right hand. And the Benjamites inherit this gene where they're all lefties, which is a great irony that the son of my right hand, which is the favored hand of
I mean, if
the Israelites.
If it's the son of my right hand, then his left hand is closest to his father's
That's very
right
true.
hand.
That would work. So anyway, so they're all lefties, and Benjamin gets a bad rap later. But anyway, so Ehud kills Eglon with a dagger. That is an R-rated story out of the Book of the Judges. Anybody notice that this book is just not fit for young children usually?
Yes, I did.
Yes.
I've
And he
noticed
leads.
how much you tone it down for like flannel graph. Like
Yeah, I've been
you don't
realizing
include
that.
the details. You just say and he kills him in his
Sometimes.
chambers.
Yeah.
Either that or you're burning through a lot of ketchup packets.
No, I don't do that. But all of the Roman soldiers that are fallen down because of the angel at the resurrection come in really handy as they can stand in for dead bodies on a battlefield without being gory. So that
Yeah, that's
you're
really
distracting.
good.
So anyway, so he leads Israel to victory over Moab. Interestingly enough, the army he leads is not an army of Benjamites, it's an army of Ephraimites, I believe. We'll remember that thought.
Oh,
Then the land has rest for 80 years. So that's like a really nice, long, peaceful time. Then the Israelites fall away again. Israel gets subjugated to Jabin, the king of Hazor. I don't think Hazor is on your map. Does anybody remember Hazor from 2 weeks ago?
Isn't it like the northern part?
Northern city, way up in Naphtali.
Yeah.
Yep. So Deborah is the next one. So Deborah is a righteous, upstanding woman, judge over Israel. Her name means bee. And
What?
B.
a
Like
bee,
the
like a
insect.
honeybee, like an insect. Bumblebee, honeybee, Deborah.
That's yep.
So God moved from the line of God to the left-handed Benjamite to, all right, we'll send a woman to save you from your enemies. This is a notch down. Several men that are further notches down here afterwards. So Deborah and Barak lead an army of Naphtalites and Zebulunites against the commander of Sisera. You'll notice Naphtali and Zebulun both are tribal inheritances in the north, and Hazor is in the north.
all of a sudden it makes sense as to why certain tribes go out to fight.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's where the geography comes in.
This makes so much more sense.
So if Ehud, the Benjamite, runs back and he can't find an army of Benjamites, why would the Ephraimites be joining him?
Because
Because
it's just
they're
north.
right
Because they're
north
the
of it.
neighbors. Yep. Sisera gets killed by Jael the Kenite in another R-rated movie scene. The land has rest from war for 40 years. The Israelites fall away again, and God oppresses them with Midianite raiders for 7 years. And this is really vicious because this is not exacting tribute. This is you plant all the crops, and then we run into your land and we steal everything from you and run away with it.
That's-
And that'll reduce some people to destitution and poverty really fast. So God sends Judge Gideon. Gideon is the least in his family of the weakest clan in the whole tribe of Manasseh, which was a junior tribe to Ephraim. So we've gone down another notch.
Quite a few
The
notches.
juniors.
Yes. Junior tribe from Joseph. Yes. Takes 300 men, defeats 120,000 Midianites. Ephraimites once again help finish off the battle. They liked getting into fights.
I was gonna say.
They were Joshua's descendants, you know.
Oh, that
Oh,
makes
okay.
sense.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Makes perfect
They were in the
sense.
middle of everything.
Yeah.
Quite literally.
Yes. So Gideon has a dark legacy. He makes a golden ephod and starts worshiping it. And that
That's like
becomes
the
a
deleted
snare.
scenes that I never knew.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. He has 70 sons, and then he has another son from a concubine named Abimelech. Abimelech kills 69 of Gideon's 70 sons after Gideon is dead. He becomes king in Shechem for 3 years, and then he gets killed by a woman who throws a millstone out of his tower and crushes Abimelech's skull.
That is
I thought that was so funny.
Yes, that story gets referenced by Joab in the book of 2 Samuel, actually.
That's why I know it.
That's why you know it. The Bible connects to itself. It's like, and later in the whole rest of the Old Testament, you'll see references to the judges. Like in the Psalms, you find these in the prophets. You find these connections in the history books, so like in the period of the kings,
What is Joab?
because the judges is kind of like the golden era. Remember the good old days when God would deliver us from
Yeah,
all of
the
our
good
enemies?
old
Yes, the good old days.
This was the good old days.
This was kind of the good old days. Remember the good old days when we didn't have kings exacting taxes from us every year? We didn't have to do army
Just forget about the
service.
tribute. That was basically taxes.
Tribute, yes. But for 40 years and 80 years, you didn't have the tribute. So next time we have a small measure of peace. I think they have peace for 40 years, and then they get subjugated by the Ammonites and the Philistines for 18 years. So God sends Jephthah, And we're another notch down. He's the son of a prostitute. Not even the son of a concubine. So he gets summoned by the elders of Gilead after he had already been expelled from Gilead. He leads the army, defeats the Ammonites. Notice he doesn't do anything with the Philistines, though. He delivers Israel from the Ammonites, and he judges for 6 years, and then he dies. Then we have a few minor judges go by, and then we have Samson. It's the next major judge.
I did not know he was a judge.
Yep, he doesn't sound like a judge. He doesn't lead any armies. He just is a one-man show.
Yeah.
The first Rambo.
Yo.
So Samson is an interesting character as far as contrast because he's a Nazirite, which is something that was laid out in the Mosaic law, where a person could have vows that would dedicate them and consecrate them to God. And in the New Testament, we see John the Baptist was a Nazirite. And so Samson is kind of like John the Baptist in that he's not supposed to cut his hair, he's not supposed to touch a dead body for anything, and he's not supposed to drink any alcohol.
He's not supposed to touch a dead body.
Nope, can't touch a dead
How
body.
is he supposed to be a warrior?
They're still alive
There's-
before he kills them.
I was gonna say, how is he supposed to use the jawbone of a donkey?
Yeah, that doesn't work right.
No, it
And
doesn't
Yeah.
the dead lion.
The
honey.
dead lion, yep, he has his faults.
Yeah.
So, like, there's the idealized Samson, he's the Nazirite, and then there's the real Samson, who's eating honey from lion carcasses,
He's got a lot of problems.
dealing with jawbones of a donkey, touching a lot of dead things he's not supposed to. He visits a prostitute, he marries a Philistine, and then he moves in with Delilah.
It's,
Not
So this is our low point for the judges that it even comes across in the book of the Judges, and you could argue that Eli goes one notch down from there.
why.
I'll get to that when we get to Eli. But he has his high points and his exploits. He kills 30 men of Ashkelon to strip them of their clothes after his wedding. He burns a whole bunch of Philistine fields by tying foxes together. And
How did he? I always wondered, how did he catch 300 foxes? And was that like a one at a time? We'll get
He's
to.
Samson.
Well, I know, but like, how do you find 300 foxes?
Oh, I can get you 300 by 10 o'clock.
All right.
Big deal.
all right, you guys
Yeah.
troubleshoot that on January 8th when I'm not here.
Got it.
Capturing 300 foxes, tying them together with their tails,
And
and
starting.
lighting torches with them. Yo.
ooh.
Then he takes out 1,000 Philistines with the donkey's jawbone. He carries off the gates of the city of Gaza. You ever seen the movie The Lord of the Rings?
Yes.
Think the gates of Minas Tirith.
Those gates.
Rip those gates off of their hinges, walk off, park them on a hill 20 miles away.
He's like a.
How?
In the middle of the
mini
night.
hope.
How?
Well, he was filled with the Spirit of God. He had supernatural strength. He was a man like anyone else. It's not like we usually envision him as like Hercules.
6'8", ripped.
Yeah, 6'8", fully ripped and totally buff. Nothing describes him that way. He had strength from God. Anyway, he meets his demise with Delilah. His eyes get put out, and he is reduced to grinding flour for the Philistines. After his hair grows out, he gets taken to the temple, and he dispatches 3,000 Philistines in short order.
Presumably officials and high-ranking nobles.
Yep. So the next judge listed is Eli. He likely is contemporary with Samson. But we find all about Eli in 1 Samuel. So he's a notch down in the sense that he's a little bit hard of hearing and a little bit blind, and his sons are absolutely wicked, and he
Oh, that's
rebukes them
right.
and they don't listen to him. And we'll read about this in your reading coming up. So
Just
this is
a-
kind of like the
a little bit down.
preview of it.
I didn't know if that was the same Eli, but yeah, okay.
But remember where the Ark of the Covenant was set up in the tabernacle. Do you remember what city that was?
Shechem?
Not
Shiloh?
Shechem.
Oh,
Shiloh.
Yeah.
Eli serves as high priest at Shiloh, which is kind of like the temple compound at that time. And that's where Samuel grows up, in Eli's house. He judges Israel for 40 years. He does not deliver Israel in that 40 years. They're oppressed by the Philistines the whole 40 years. And he dies on the same day that his 2 wicked sons die in battle. The Ark of the Covenant gets captured by the Philistines, wanders around down in the land of the Philistines for 9 months before
Doesn't
getting
he
sent
fall off a
back.
chair and die?
He fell off a chair and died. He was 99 years old. So when you're 99, you think about falling off a chair and what that might do to your neck.
I was
It's
gonna
still
say
kind of
yes.
sad though.
It is sad.
That's yeah.
So, the appendices, all the stories that don't fit into that timeline. That's kind of like the main sequence of Judges that we just went through in a blitz. Then you have the appendices. We have the Danites settling in the north. And this seems like a really oddball story. It wasn't actually part of the reading, but I think most of you did read it actually. This seems to take place very early in the period of the Judges, because it was specifically because they weren't allowed to settle in the coastal plain. So the Danites, yeah, it was settled by Philistines and Canaanites at that time, and they weren't letting them move in. And so a bunch of Danites, but not all of them, because remember Samson was a Danite, but he was living in the south. So not all the Danites moved north, but some of them found Laish in northern Israel. They destroyed it and they renamed it Dan, and that is in the very far northern part. Is it on the tribal allotment map, Annabelle?
Oh yeah, it is.
It is. And they set up an idol worship there, and it's Moses' grandson who's installed as the priest. And I think it's really funny that they've got this guy and they don't connect him to anybody until the very end of the story, and then there's the big reveal, and he's Moses' grandson. And everybody's just like, oh my goodness, it's so scandalous. But
Yeah.
later, we'll come back to Dan, and we'll find that this becomes a center of idolatry later in the period of the kings.
Really?
Yes. And the funny thing is, they settled up there thinking that this would be a safe location. They actually happened to be the first point to get invaded every single time from the north.
Really?
Well, yeah, because
Yes.
they're the furthest north.
They were the furthest north, and all the big empires came from the north.
Wait, where did they settle up north?
Laish, Dan, way
Oh,
up north.
Laish.
Yep.
Gotcha.
So the other appendix is the civil war with Benjamin.
I remember this story, but I don't know why, but I remember this story.
Oh, I know.
Yep.
It's because it's in the kids' Bible. That's why you
Oh.
remember it. It's one of the major stories. in
I
the kids'
remember
Bible.
the poor dude who had something happen to his daughter, and I remember a whole
It's
conversation.
his wife. It's concubine.
No, the guy who said
He-
if you deliver.
That's a different.
This.
That's a different. You mean the guy who's like the first object that comes out of my house to grieve me,
Yeah.
I will offer up as a burnt sacrifice to you.
Yeah, what's
That was
word is
Jephthah.
that?
Yeah, that was.
What did
John.
he think was gonna come out of his house?
That's what I wondered. I'm like, what do you think is coming out of your house? The oxen being like, oh, master's returned.
Since you bring that up, there is a strong possibility.
And I remember having
That-
this conversation.
yes.
Yes.
So, that passage has troubled a great many people through the years, because at face value, it's like, you offered your daughter as a burnt offering? Because that sounds horrifying. And so you ask yourself a few questions, like, who would be offering up the sacrifice? It'd be a priest. What priest of Aaron's descent would offer up a human sacrifice? Find that in the book of Leviticus somewhere as an option. It's not going to go anywhere.
Fulfillment of the house.
However, you could consecrate people to God's service, and
Okay,
that would
like
be
Samuel.
like Samuel was, exactly.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And so, to devote something to the Lord might mean you destroy it in a burnt offering, or it might also mean that you devote it to the service of God at the tabernacle. And since she went off into the hills and was bemoaning that she would never get married, rather than she was going to never live to old age, would point towards, she was essentially joining a convent, so to speak,
Oh my gosh.
in order to fulfill her father's vow.
That,
Which would be troublesome for Jephthah, because then he would have no descendants after her, because she would die without any children. And so then, it's tragic for him, because then his name is blotted out from the inheritances, and his inheritance goes to his cousins instead of his children and descendants.
that is so that sounds.
But the civil war with Benjamin takes place in the early period we know this because Phineas is the high priest, and he's mentioned a few times at the end of the book of Joshua. He's also mentioned at the beginning of the Judges. He's the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron.
Isn't he the uber rebellious or uber
Zealous.
zealous dude?
Yes, he ran 2 people through with a spear while they were getting together in a tent.
Oh yeah, that one.
Yes. So there's a violent homosexual offense in Gibeah in the tribe of Benjamin. The Israelites give them an ultimatum: turn these people over to us for justice. Benjamin sides with their tribal loyalties, and so all Israel decides they have to go to war against Benjamin. First 2 attacks fail. Israel loses 40,000 soldiers in 2 days. And then the third attempt succeeds. It's another one of those draw the army out, make them think that they're winning, and then destroy the city behind them with the
And the
ambush.
column of smoke is the signal to go destroy the other army.
Yes,
I
and
swear
then the
by it.
Benjamites are crushed from both sides, and they almost all die. Only 600 men of Benjamin survive. Now this is challenging because there's a lot of Benjamites that come up through the rest of the Old Testament, like Saul and Ehud. Ehud likely was one of these survivors or a descendant of a survivor, but he didn't have many Benjamites to call on, so he called on the Ephraimites, I believe. It's possible that Ehud was a generation before this event. Hard to say because it doesn't peg it. The best we get is we know Phineas was alive. So afterwards they make a rash vow that no one will give their daughter to a Benjamite for a wife. And then all of a sudden they realize then there's no more Benjamites in a generation, so they come up with 400 wives from Jabesh Gilead, which comes into play in the days of Saul next week.
Wait,
They're still short 200 wives, and so they abscond with 200 girls from Shiloh to take care of that need.
Yeah, that's the story I remember.
that
Yes.
sounds dramatic.
That's
Yeah,
the
it
dramatic
is.
part. So then,
That's when they realized they needed a king.
I know, it's like in those days Israel had no king. Everyone did as he saw fit.
Oh.
Exactly, like this is just not working right. So then the other piece of the period of the Judges that is an outlier is the book of Ruth, which I did not have you read this time. Is everybody familiar with the story of Ruth?
You just did a sermon on. Okay.
I did do a series on it.
Is
So
Boaz a Benjamite?
Boaz is not a Benjamite. He's of the tribe of Judah.
Oh.
Genealogy.
Yep.
Oh. Oh my gosh.
All right. So the main characters in the book of Ruth that are on this genealogy are Ruth and Boaz. Boaz is the son of Salmon and Rahab. Salmon being one of the 2 spies, I believe. Rahab being one of the sole survivors of Jericho. And in the book of Ruth, Elimelech takes Naomi over to Moab with their 2 sons to escape a famine. And they don't survive this well. Elimelech dies, his 2 sons die, and so then Naomi returns to Judah with Ruth, one of her daughter-in-laws. Now, because Boaz is the son of Rahab and Salmon, this is thought to happen at the early side of the period of the Judges. Boaz is really old in the story, so it doesn't have to be crazy early, but it's definitely on the front end. Anybody remember Moab in the book of Judges?
Yeah.
Who delivered Israel from Moab? Ehud, yep. So this either took place during the oppression with the Moabites or afterwards, after Israel had somewhat subjugated the Moabites and they were perhaps on more friendly terms. But there was at least an open door for emigrating from Judah over to Moab for a while. In any case, Ruth and Naomi actually live as beggars for a year or so before Ruth gets married to Boaz. And this illustrates a lot of the social poverty laws that are enacted in Leviticus, and they're actually lived out in Ruth's life. And so we see a picture of that, and you can just assume that this is probably commonplace and standard operating procedure across the land of Israel. But through this, she gets married to Boaz, and Boaz and Ruth become the paternal great-grandparents of King David, who comes around at the end of the Judges as one of the first great kings. So in the genealogy here, I connected Levi and Judah together here. This goes all the way back up to Jacob and Leah. Levi and Judah are the third and fourth born sons of Leah. Judah has a liaison with Tamar and has twins, Zerah and Perez, who most of the descendants of Judah come from, actually. So then the line goes Perez to Hezron, Hezron to Ram, Ram to Amminadab. All those generations are in Egypt before the Exodus. Amminadab is the same generation as Moses or Amram, but he has a daughter named Elisheba and a son named Nashon. Elisheba marries Aaron, and she becomes the mother of the whole lineage of the high priesthood. Nashon goes ahead and becomes father of the line of David a few generations later.
That guy.
So Amminadab links the two, the priesthood and the line of kings together
Why
through
are
his
we
daughter.
talking about? Yeah.
Yep.
So that guy was like way back.
He grew up and lived in Egypt. He may have died in the desert during the Exodus, possibly. It's hard to say.
But he is where Jesus and the high priest of the connect.
Yep. All right, so we just blitzed through a lot of information. Does anybody have any questions?
I think, you can work on these genealogies and timelines and chronologies. Isn't it, at the end of the day, people do not obey? I mean, it's almost like the entire, certainly the Old Testament, the Jewish law, is put out there to show human beings that they can't do it.
That is the theme of the book of Judges. Every generation has to choose to worship God and not start worshiping the false gods of their neighbors. And if the generation chooses to do so, it goes well with them. And if they don't, it does not go well with them. But they're always given an opportunity to repent and be delivered. Sometimes
Right.
it just takes a long time for them to turn around on that.
Which is more proof that, the false teaching that God is about vengeance and punishment, well, he might be about correction, but he wants restoration, right? So he's a just God. That verse that we read in the sword drill, God is good. Oh, you got my mind racing. Oh, I close my eyes tonight and all I see is these numbers. And I can't tell if they're dates or tribes or verses. I'm all messed up. It's good though, thank you, Pastor.
You're welcome.
Is that all for today?
That will be all for today.